Welcome to Evangelicalish, where we discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly of the American Evangelical Church, deconstruction, faith, and God's love through it all. Join us for these episodes live on our Evangelicalish YouTube page on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central, and 6 o'clock Pacific. Let's journey together.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Evangelicalish podcast. I'm Jeremy.
I'm April.
I'm Paul.
And it's good to see every one of you this evening. I tell you what, if you have not joined that Evangelicalish community yet, we have had a couple of those Evangelicalish community only episodes or Zooms. That has been absolutely fantastic. The dialogue is absolutely killer. So head on over, if you haven't done that yet, head over evangelicalish.com and you can join the Ish community. There are 3 different options as far as levels. So whether you're somebody who, I understand that this is a crazy time of year. This season is financially crazy for a lot of folks, but there's levels as little as $5, so you can be a part of that, and it helps us just continue to put out great content. So we would.
And Jeremy, can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Charles is here from Chula Vista. He is our Antichrist, our one Antichrist level subscriber right now. So Charles, Thank you.
Big round of applause for Charles tonight.
Doing the anti-Lord's work.
Doing the Antichrist's work. Anyway, so yeah, absolutely. And so, you can become an end of times villain as well. We have the false prophet level, the beast level, and the Antichrist level, and all of those get our undying love. But Charles, who is at the Antichrist level, gets extra love from us for sure. So,
and if I could interrupt you one more time, just to say, our private event with our beast level and Antichrist level subscribers was so much fun this week, and the folks on there were saying, hey, just to be able to be together, see that we're not alone, have this community, meant a lot. So if you haven't, if you're thinking about should I jump in or not, I think when we get to have those Zoom sessions with our community, it's really, really cool to get to see everybody face to face and sort of chat things through, so we're not journeying alone in this crazy world.
Absolutely. Gotta love it. So anyway, head on over to evangelicalish.com. That's evangelicalish.com. And you can join the Ish community there. You can also order some merchandise as well. We got t-shirts and all sorts of good stuff like that. So check that out for sure. And last but never least, if you're listening, whatever your favorite podcast platform is, if there's an option to leave a review or a star rating, definitely give us all the stars and say nice things about us, especially on Apple and Spotify. And last but never least, last bit of housekeeping I want to cover. For those of you who were giving us shout outs, I was being tagged in stories and things like that of being on people's,
Spotify Wrapped.
Yeah, they're Wrapped.
Top podcasts.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Every time I see that, that's really exciting. And we're super grateful for that as well, because that just means that we're spending good time together, and we're thankful that you take time to listen to us. So, all right. Other than that, let's go ahead. We're going to bring in our guest tonight. I'm really excited. This is a friend of mine. We started out friends on TikTok, and now we are friends IRL, in real life. Yeah. And so Candice Teets joins us tonight. An incredible creator on TikTok. You could follow her there or on Instagram, Candice Cakes _ on in both spaces, and just some really great challenging content, some solid deconstruction content, anti-racism content, as well as Indigenous content. And that's really what we want to dive into. We've got Thanksgiving in the rearview mirror, and we were discussing a team. Yeah, thank goodness. Yeah. Fuck. But we were, Candice, we get explicit on this show. Yeah. Yeah. You can say whatever. It's free reign here. But what I was going to say is that I think one thing that came up with us is that we were discussing what does what does Thanksgiving mean now? And especially as people who are trying to be wise and understanding and supportive of other cultures and other folks, like what should those feelings be? What is kind of the original Thanksgiving look like? And what is the view from Indigenous folks about, what seems to be a very like white holiday at this point. But so we're excited to have Candice on to give that perspective and to get off into a lot of other things, especially when it comes to not just colonization of holidays, but colonization of just colonization in general. So
period.
And of religion.
Blank. Fill in the blank.
Yeah. So, all right, let's dive in. Candice, tell us a little bit about yourself to start off, kind of, how you got on TikTok and what got you to start making content and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So Paul and I were actually talking a little bit about this at the start, but before we all joined together. So I got on TikTok like everybody else at the beginning of quarantine. I'm going to need to do something with my headphones because I'm hearing echoes on my end. Sorry. So I got in right at the start of quarantine just because I was super pregnant and super bored and super alone at my house with my then 4-year-old, and started making content and stumbled upon deconstruction TikTok. And I had been in a really weird place, felt like I was kind of on my own for the most part, until I discovered this thriving community on TikTok. And so then it gave me courage to kind of start producing some of my own very, very amateur TikTok material. And so I started talking about my experiences and the way that I was raised and how I kind of started unlearning things and that kind of thing. And so now I post pretty regularly. It ranges from anything from like deconstruction to what's going on in the news that particularly affects BIPOC individuals. And then this past month, with it being Native American Heritage Month, I focused some of my content on different aspects of Indigenous heritage and my experiences as an Indigenous person. So that's kind of how I started producing content, or content creating, I guess is a better word for it. I obviously grew up on social media, so none of it's really all that new to me. What is new to me is having people notice. So that's been fun. But in all honesty, it has been fun because it makes me laugh probably harder than most things, because people on the internet are insane. And
True.
That is 1,000% right.
My husband and I will read their comments and just like cackle laughing at some of the things that people say.
Are people
nuts.
crazy on the internet? I hadn't noticed that.
Well, Paul, let me tell you about this one guy. He goes by the username
Whiskey Dick. I knew it was coming.
Dick. Yes.
What a username.
I mean, if
He's
that's your
our favorite.
problem, what a weird thing to like admit to. First off, like,
It's true.
oh, poor little guy.
I've started, this is probably not okay, but I just feel like if people are going to bully me, then I'm just going to meet them with the same energy. So I've just started, particularly with insecure men, just responding with, I'm so sorry, it's small, I'm so sorry. And that like it's related to anything that we're talking about, because I'm just like, why are you so awful?
Little guy.
Sometimes, I mean, it's a low blow, literally. But sometimes they just deserve it. Sometimes there's just nothing else to say. Like, you can't actually have a conversation. It's just like,
no,
you just suck. You just suck.
I feel like if you come in there, racist, misogynistic, like on its face, it's kind of fair game at that point. I put out a friends only video here a couple weeks ago, and I was like, hey guys, this is like,
Did you say a fans only video or a
friends only?
friends? Oh, okay, good.
Oh,
good.
pastor from Oklahoma, OnlyFans? Is that in the future?
Oh yeah,
Sorry,
you can subscribe.
Jeremy.
You can subscribe right now.
You know what? Whatever pays the bills, right?
Just kidding.
Hey, we all got to have,
I mean,
have a little
honestly,
side gig.
I've literally calculated like I could probably make a lot of money if I did it. But
Right.
I have
these,
not.
These feet aren't going to take pics of themselves. What can I say?
Seriously, if I could just do feet, I think I might actually do it. Because to me, like that's nothing. I don't know. This is not the conversation we're having.
How
Candice
did,
for,
how
but-
did we bring on Candice for this conversation?
I'm good with it.
Paul? Paul chimes in. A fans only video.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's
That
true,
was my
Paul.
fault. That was my fault.
Yeah, no, a
You
friends,
were talking friends
mutual,
only. Okay. Yes, okay.
mutual people that I follow. They follow me back. Those are the only people that could see this video for clarity.
And you weren't naked in it.
Sure.
Well, I didn't say I wasn't naked in it. I just said this was for friends only.
Just those friendly nudes.
Yeah. It's not only fans; it's only friends. So, but anyway, I was mentioning like I was really exhausted with some of the ridiculous pushback and just some of the hateful like DMs and stuff that I was getting. And Candice commented on there. She was like, I know they say just don't say anything, and don't give these people attention, but like if they want it, I'm here to give it to them. Like I loved
Here's
it.
the attention you ordered.
Yeah. No, you asked
Candice,
for it.
Candice, I think if we understood first century Jerusalem and the culture there, we would know that when Jesus said, you strain gnats to swallow camels and stuff like that, that was the you guys are small penises of the day.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he was saying.
Meet him with the same energy.
Just meet him with
Absolutely.
that energy. But so
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna. I was segue. Yeah, for sure. So
That one was all my fault, guys. Sorry about that.
I mean, listen, we Evangelicalish only fans. Sorry. Anyway.
Just for the record, that does not come with your subscription. Just throwing it out there. That's not included at this point.
But if there's interest,
yeah, but if there's interest, we would do a calendar. Let's do a calendar. We should do a calendar for beast level people.
We should call it sexy deconstruction.
Yes. But and then obviously make it just very ridiculous. That's a great idea.
I seriously want to do a sexy deconstruction.
I think it's a fantastic idea. I've never loved anything more than that. Y'all need to get in the comments right now if you're watching.
Time.
Do what?
If only you had done it before Christmas time, so it could be like a Christmas present.
It would have been
you
great.
Get on it in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, maybe for next year.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, we got.
There's still time.
There's time.
There's plenty of time. We could release it for Valentine's Day.
Ooh.
We could slide it into Matt Chandler's DMs. Just a free link. Here you go, Matt Chandler. Mail it to him for Valentine's Day.
Maddie C.
Okay, yeah. I don't know how we keep getting off on sexy photos. We've literally never talked about this.
We have literally, this has gone off the rails.
We're now doing like the Holy Post guys who talk for a half an hour about absolute nonsense before they ever get to the podcast.
So let's kind of talk about your perspective as an Indigenous woman on the holiday of Thanksgiving. And my question would be like right off the bat, as someone who's married to like a white man, right? How does that kind of, is there kind of a push and pull with like your heritage and kind of figuring out how to blend that and, just kind of how you navigate all that?
Yeah. So we joke all the time in my household that I married a white guy just to get land back. So it's kind of
paying reparations till death do you part.
Exactly. What's so interesting is he really didn't know much about Indigenous culture at all before he met me. So it's been a learning experience for him for the past 12 years, which is really fun. I think some people would be annoyed by it, but I think it's really fun. We can kind of mutually learn together. I didn't grow up in a super traditional home. My mother was a youth pastor. So my parents were super evangelical on the charismatic side of things. So if you're not familiar with that kind of church, everything that is indigenous is evil. So I didn't really get to participate in as much of my culture as I would have wanted growing up. Of course, I didn't know any better. It wasn't until I started doing Indigenous pageants when I was in high school that I really started to delve into my heritage, my language, different traditions, learning about traditional regalia and that type of thing. So the question was what?
Well, so the question is kind of your your cultural view on Thanksgiving, and then also, the follow up to that. How does that kind of play out in a family that of diversity like you have?
Right. So to kind of go back to my background, my mom. Let me go back a little further. So my grandmother was in Fort Sill Indian School in Oklahoma.
Oh, wow.
So she went there from the time she was about 6 to 14. So she raised her children, my aunts and uncles, with a healthy respect for Indigenous culture, but assimilation was kind of the goal, right? So that was the thing. And so when my mom grew up, she had the intention, she actually told me, and I hope she's okay with me sharing this, but I'm going to do it anyway, that she had the intention of marrying a white man. She had dated other Native guys in her hometown, but the racism that she had experienced caused her to desire to assimilate even further. So when my sister and I were born, instilling our culture into us wasn't her first priority. And that comes from generational trauma, right? So when we celebrated Thanksgiving, it was never weird to me. I didn't think it was really weird until I started working for a diversity office a couple of years ago. And one of my coworkers was like, "Do you celebrate not Christmas, Thanksgiving?" And I was like, "Yeah." Why? Like, I thought that was just like such a weird question. And she was like, "Well, I thought that, because of all the history and everything, that might be a touchy subject for you." And it never really was. I always knew the background. I always knew that the story that we're taught in school was not 100% true. But I started digging into it a little bit deeper at that point. Funny story, with the way that my mom kind of instilled the truth instead of whitewashing history. Columbus Day, for example, we had just moved back to Oklahoma when I was like in second grade, and we had a big Columbus Day assembly.
Yeah.
And my mom was super pissed that we had a Columbus Day assembly. And so she tried to go to the administration and be like, "This is ridiculous. Like, this guy's an asshole." She didn't use that word at the time. Filling in modern vernacular.
But I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah. And they were like, "No, we're still going to go through with it. And Candice is going to be singing in it," or whatever, because I was in the choir. And so my mom, in retaliation, told me that in second grade, my mom tells me that Columbus and all his men raped Indigenous people and cut off their hands. And so I go to school that day and tell all of my classmates what I learned. And so the assembly was a group of second graders singing songs like this. Like,
yeah.
I ruined Columbus Day, basically.
Good for you.
I mean, listen,
good for you.
Way to go.
Yeah. So there was a little bit of back and forth growing up between like assimilating to social norms and modern culture and respecting the history of these holidays that we're celebrating. So I always kind of knew. And like I said, it wasn't weird to me until somebody brought it up to me later. And then the past couple of years, I've really been delving into the history of, Thanksgiving and the reality of what happened.
Yeah. And so
how was it communicated to you that Indigenous, and I grew up in a charismatic environment too, that anything Indigenous was evil and not of evangelicalism?
Right. I just kind of always knew. There was just this understanding that if it didn't come from the Bible, if it didn't come from the pulpit, then it was evil. And when my mother was a youth pastor, I was in like 3rd to 6th grade. And she really sort of pushed against the system to try and get some ministry into Indigenous churches that she grew up in. So we had a drama team and a worship team. And looking back on it, it's super cheesy because it was like late 90s. What was it? What's that called? The Assemblies of God does it. The human
video.
Yeah, we used to do human videos all the time.
Done a few of those.
Yeah. And then we had a worship team. And so we would bring them to Native American churches or like camps and stuff in the summer. And the pushback really came from our church at the time because they didn't want to honor Indigenous religion. They only wanted it to be about Jesus. And we didn't know any better at the time. I would say my mom didn't even know about it at the time, or any better at the time. So she kind of went along with it. But we had, like, my mom could tell stories about all kinds of really incredible things of breakthrough happening with these Indigenous churches just by honoring their traditions. But our church didn't want that to happen. And then more recently, I went to the International House of Prayer in 2008, 2009. And my leaders all the time, like when I would come home and then come back to Kansas City, there was one specific instance where I went to a New Year's Eve powwow. And when I came back, my worship leader was like, how can you call yourself a Christian when you're participating in these ceremonies? And I was like, well, what people don't realize if you've never been to a powwow is how centered on the creator these ceremonies are. We begin powwows with prayer. We pray over food. We are constantly honoring the creator throughout the ceremony. And if you've never been, you might think it's super taboo, or heathen was the word that was always used. It's not until you get there that you realize most of these people actually do love Jesus. And we can get into the reasons why and the terrible history of why, but most of these people do love Jesus. And to say something to probably anybody other than me at the time, that's so offensive. But I didn't have the backbone at the time to be like, dude, that's a really shitty take,
Yeah.
And then at my last church, I had my pastor, and we're friends and whatever, but I was super offended because at one point he had made a point to poke fun at the haka and say that it was demonic. So that's like a example of all of the things that have happened in the church that just reiterated to me that my culture, my history is evil and not of God.
How did that feel? Like, did you ever question it, or did you just kind of, easier to just assimilate and go along with it?
For the most part, it was easier to assimilate. I had the goal in mind of being part of vocational ministry. So, up until the past couple of years, I probably would have just not said anything. And most of the time it didn't. With the specific comment about the powwow, I did take it upon myself to kind of educate the group and tell them, like, we have a very Christ-centered ceremony. So what you said was super rude. That was the only time that I ever did that, because I was always afraid of the backlash I would receive.
So it's interesting. Oh, go ahead, April.
No, you go ahead.
So you've just recently were then confronted kind of with this Thanksgiving idea. So how has that journey been now, and how are you as an Indigenous person of that lineage looking at Thanksgiving today?
So my family has always viewed Thanksgiving really more just to celebrate our family versus going through the history. We don't sit around the table and talk about what we're thankful for. We just love each other and eat good food. Sometimes we'll have indigenous foods like Indian corn or fry bread on Thanksgiving. That hasn't happened in a while, and I'm going to request that does. But that's typically how we celebrate it. So that's kind of part of the reason why it was never weird to me until somebody brought it up. Then I started looking into the history. And like I said, I always knew that it wasn't true. Some of the things that I found particularly interesting, we're all told that, the pilgrims came and they invited the natives to come and have a meal, but that didn't actually happen. Thanksgiving was something that Puritans celebrated frequently, especially at the beginning of a new season to thank God for their harvest. And Indigenous people weren't invited. The only reason they got invited was because there were probably a bunch of riled up colonists who were shooting off guns in the air. And Indigenous people came and were like, what the heck is going on? And that's how they got an invitation. It wasn't this peaceful offering. They showed up because they thought the colonists were in danger.
Well, I had even read that like some scholars believed that they kind of like forcefully invited Indigenous tribes to come to these, like you said, these seasonal celebration meals. And it was because the colonists weren't producing enough crops because they didn't know how to grow the land yet. And so they were like, kind of forcefully making this thing happen to have the Indigenous people bring food, and then to also kind of like hold them down and be like, how do you grow this stuff or whatever. And so it has manipulation kind of all over it versus just like, oh, hey, you're here too. Like, let's, whatever. Yeah. It's like,
the reality of it is, what we view as the first Thanksgiving is a conglomeration of several years of stories happening. So what we are told is the story of Thanksgiving is Indigenous people weren't invited. Then they were forced to be there to teach them how to survive. And then they were also forced to be there so they could evangelize them so that they could Jesus.
Yeah.
I was watching a video today, and maybe you can tell me if this is true or not, that this story never became a part of American mythology, as Joy is saying in the comments there, until like the 20th century. Like, we never paid any attention to this Thanksgiving story that we had until, in the last 100 years or so.
Yeah, that's my understanding of it, that it wasn't even something that was annually celebrated. Really, it started being annually celebrated as a result of Abraham Lincoln. He declared it a national holiday. So that's at least 200 years that it wasn't ever celebrated. And then it wasn't kind of more mainstream until much later than, Abraham Lincoln. And
I think Lincoln did it to celebrate the Civil War. But I think it was Eisenhower who put it in ultimately as an official national holiday.
It wasn't made a national holiday until 1941. Actually, is when Congress set it as the last Thursday of November or whatever third Thursday of November. I don't know, whatever. But 1941, and part of that was it was to boost country morale. Because of the war. So the whole goal was
it was kind of
yeah. Of course, it's America. It's all about patriotism and the war. Right. And so it was this thing of like, giving folks, like Congress passed it to give people an extra day off, like around the holiday times. And then to also kind of boost country morale and patriotism of like, oh, we get to be together and be thankful. So it was very much like a political move that kind of surrounded the United States getting involved. And that's obviously very early, but getting involved in World War I. So, or World War II, excuse me. And so, yeah, it's crazy.
And also around the same time that Lincoln celebrated Thanksgiving, there, I may get the facts incorrect, but you can look it up, give it a goog, there were 38, I believe 38 Lakota warriors who were just sentenced to death by Lincoln around the same time that he decided to become public about celebrating Thanksgiving. So the celebrations of Thanksgiving not only lie about our history, but it sort of rubs salt in a wound of years and years and years of assimilation, of murder, of death, of discrimination, because I mean, that's America. That's just
wow.
Also,
I was just going to say, maybe you did the Google too, Jeremy. I just Googled, and Thanksgiving was made an official holiday on December 26th. It was signed into law December 26, 1941. So,
well, no, what I was going
to Peg's comment there, she's saying we weren't in the war in November, but when the law was passed, we had December 7th was Pearl Harbor of that year. So we were in the war when the law was passed.
Well, and it was already pretty commonly known, and you'll just have to forgive me because of my, history nerdism, but it was already assumed that we were going to go to the European front because there was a lot of national pressure because of all the hate stuff coming from Germany. So there was already an assumption, and that's why on December 7th of 41, Pearl Harbor was bombed, because the Japanese thought that we had all of our attention in Europe. And so again, there's a lot of conversation, and you can go back and read some documents and stuff like that about this being a political move. It really was. It was just a political move like anything else. And so now we've created this mythological idea of, it's just how we all get along, and that's just whitewashing history. It's continuing to whitewash history.
Absolutely.
How do you view Thanksgiving now?
I guess I just I've celebrated it my whole life, but it's never been about the holiday. It's always been just to be around family. And so that aspect of it hasn't changed. This year, I spent a lot more time echoing Indigenous voices and looking into the history. I started listening, which I'm going to read the book, but I started listening to an Indigenous Peoples Guide of United States history, which is flippin' fantastic if you have not read it or heard of it. The reason why I want to actually read it and not listen to it is because there's so many nuggets of amazing just truth and history, and I'm a little bit of a history nerd too. So I want to digest it more, and that's not something I could really do during an audiobook. Like, I want to underline and make notes.
Yeah, highlight.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's kind of how I've done things a little bit differently this year, is just diving into more Indigenous voices. The older I get, the more I want to do that.
I would think even the myth of these Europeans having this meal with the native folks would be bittersweet from the Indigenous side, to think, well even if it was nice up front, it didn't stay nice for very long. It suddenly
wasn't nice up front anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it, when the Puritans came, they didn't come really to escape persecution. They came to continue to be able to persecute. That's why they left.
Yeah.
Religious freedom was a thing in Europe. They didn't like it, and they wanted to come somewhere else. Then you have the whole story of Squanto, who was
Yeah.
we are told that he is this individual who was a translator and he was super peaceful and he helped the colonists survive. And there's some truth to that. But when you look deeper, Squanto's entire tribe had died from disease that they had received from the Puritans and the colonists. He was the last remaining individual from his tribe. He also, prior to meeting the Pilgrims when they got there, he had been sold into slavery, moved to London, then came back, and that's how he was able to translate to other Indigenous people. So not only was he the last of his tribe, but he was also a slave. So that's the basis of the story of the first Thanksgiving. So it's not even peaceful if you look at it just a little bit more than 5 seconds.
It's not the howdy neighbor that everybody wants to make it sound like. Oh my gosh.
And it literally takes just an extra glance at history to go, oh, this is not right, you know?
Yeah. I mean, how do you know, because you can almost understand seeing that and folks inside of the Native American community just being so hurt and torn by that. You know, so kind of how do you navigate the reality of Native American history in the United States, which is ugly. It's a black eye. But then on the other side of that, like, you know, your family working to assimilate, like you had mentioned, and all of that. So how do you kind of find the best of two worlds in trying to walk that tightrope a little bit of, you know, hanging on to your heritage, but also like maybe just continuing to kind of try to walk through culture with other people?
You know, I wish I had a really good answer for that. It's just become so second nature to me that I don't know how to explain it. My dad obviously is white. I married a white guy. So like I'm very much the product of successful assimilation. It's trying to go backwards and reconnect to my heritage. That is really what's different. So I don't really have a great way to reconcile a lot of this. And I started really delving into it a couple of years ago in 2020 when this was coming up right in Thanksgiving, because I had just started really having a name for deconstruction, even though I had been doing it for a while, and thinking through like, how can I decolonize my faith versus like deconstructing? Because I wanted to take the assimilation out of it, I guess, for lack of a better word. When I started thinking about it from that lens, it became so overwhelming, because then I realized that everything that the United States is built on, right, the religious freedom, all of that, is based upon the idea of killing the Indian to save the man. And so my whole world sort of came crashing down when I realized everything that I believed about Christianity came from colonization. That was a really painful thing to realize. And so I'm still kind of going through it, trying to figure out what that looks like. I stumbled upon a book called Rescuing the Gospel from the Cowboys, and it talks about an indigenous expression of Christianity, and that colonists never gave indigenous people the ability to have their own expression. It was forced upon them that you have to pray this way. You need to learn English. You need to believe this. Oh, the Bible is very clear on this. You know, all of those things that are still really echoed today. That was what was told to indigenous people 400 years ago, then again in residential schools. And we never got to have the chance to connect to Jesus as our creator in our own way. It was always forced upon us.
that being Christian was to be a white European, or at least look like one. It's what I hate about this conversation about CRT and all these things. It's we don't want our kids to feel like they're racist, and it seems to me like it's an avoidance of understanding this reality of, manifest destiny meant killing, trying to create genocide against a group of people. And I think we should sit with that and feel that pain sometime.
Yeah, that's a really pretty name for let's wipe out an entire culture.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I'm saying?
What it's saying is God wants us to wipe out these godless people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so you can call it whatever it is, but genocide is the word. And, so I do want to go back to one thing, Candice, because you said you're kind of working backwards in your process. Do you find that to be true for a lot of folks in Native American circles that you come in contact with? And also, is there a level of frustration because you're having to kind of rediscover your heritage in what seems like in a backwards way?
Yeah. I'm always super jealous of the people who grew up around their traditions, who know their language. Most indigenous languages are dying. There are a handful that are thriving. And again, that's just assimilation in action. I would say that most indigenous people that I'm around, so like my family, the people that I'm in relationship with, are working backwards. But I would not say that that's true for indigenous people as a whole. I think especially those who weren't raised in the church, they're moving forward and not working backwards. They came with a foundation of their heritage, their language, their traditions being the norm, and Eurocentric America being odd to them. And I'm doing the opposite. So yeah, I mean, especially for my nuclear family that I came from, we're all kind of working backwards. But I don't think that's true for everyone.
So is your mom now, does she still think it's evil, or has she deconstructed it too?
She started to deconstruct that while she was a youth pastor because of the pushback that she was receiving. She was like, this is who I am, so you can kick rocks. This is what I'm going to do. And our pastor at the time, we got invited. I was 7, but her youth group and her drama team got invited to a residential school in Oklahoma called, oh my gosh, what is it called? Riverside Indian School in Anadarko, Oklahoma, to speak. I believe it was during Red Ribbon Week. Again, I was 7 years old, so I may be remembering this wrong. But, and at that time, our pastor, who also was a BIPOC individual, so this is weird, but he very much was you're going for Red Ribbon Week. Isn't it a bunch of drunk Indians? Said really offensive things to my mother at the time. And he wasn't going to fund it. He wasn't going to allow the church bus to go. And my mom said, I'm going to pay for it myself. We're going to take these kids and we're going to show them how to be Jesus to this population instead of whatever the hell you're doing. We're going to go and actually be the hands and feet of Jesus. And so that's what they did, which was really interesting because it's a federally funded school that invited a church to come and do the whole Red Ribbon Week. And it was incredibly powerful. Even with all the weird feelings that I have about charismatic church and that kind of thing that I do now, I'm no, that was legit what happened back then. Of course, I was 7, so my memory is probably full of weird gold dust and things that don't.
Gold dust.
Are you incorporating this into your household now? Are you teaching your children this history and having them live out of that part of their inheritance and lineage?
Yes, I'm certainly trying to. So this year I brought my kids to their first powwow. And it's very humbling to realize how much work you have to do when you bring a 6-year-old to a powwow and she starts calling the fancy dancer the scary man in the costume. That was really embarrassing, like out loud in front of other people. I was like, this is a teachable moment. Like it's regalia. Okay. But the more that she gets exposed to it, the less shocking it is to her. So that's kind of my goal coming up. Also, I have little kids, so it's kind of been hard to take them anywhere without them being overstimulated and throwing a huge fit when we go anywhere. So
Totally get it.
I'm trying to get a little bit of grace on that.
Yeah, no, for sure. But that's great that it's kind of that thing that we've talked about on here before in different conversations. Like, we're going to do better for our kids, right? Like, or attempt to always do better for our kids, that they're more inclusive and more, diverse in their thinking and education and all of that. And so, it's exciting that hopefully they won't have to learn backwards like you have, that they are going to have appreciation for the culture that they come from, which is really cool.
Well, and my mother and my grandmother and my aunt are really, especially lately, have been really intentional about teaching the generation that my children are in. So my grandmother taught my daughter Jesus Loves Me in Comanche, which is the tribe that I'm from. She does Indigenous crafts all the time and makes sure to give it to my daughter, tell her what the word is, and explain different things about it. And so it's really helpful to have the older generation support me in trying to instill these truths in my kids.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. I know. I remember last year, I'm white and
no way.
I know, I'm like so pale. I'm like sour cream. But last year, so my daughter's in first grade now. Last year she was in kindergarten. And I had kind of feel like in deconstructing evangelicalism, I had to deconstruct patriotism at the same time and American history. And obviously a lot of that has to do with Indigenous people and how awful we were to them when I was taught, what was it? 1642. What's the date? It was Columbus sailed
1492.
1492. I flipped him around. Anyway,
so far that you can't even remember.
I know. Look at that. But I always had taught that Columbus was on this pedestal, and I had heard people say that he was actually a bad man, and I thought like, oh, that's just a lie from the devil, which is stupid. Anyway, there's a point to this story. Last year, my daughter was in kindergarten, and we live in a very conservative area. And I may have talked about this on the show last year, but for the week before Thanksgiving, they, in this very white, conservative public elementary school, had all of the kids have little vests, and they made headdresses with and they gave them Native American names. Like my daughter came home with a thing that said running deer on it.
No.
And I was so I was like, I am very angry about this. But I'm also white. And I was like, they're going to just think I'm this like crazy woke person. But I couldn't not do anything. I also got in an argument with my kindergartner because she doesn't know any better. She's just, and at that age, your teacher's like your idol. And she was like, yeah. And she came and was like, Mommy, we dressed as Indians today. And I was like, Raylan, that's not what they're called. It's like, those are Indigenous people or Native Americans or the first Americans, if you can't say that.
Wait, no. Her teacher told them they were Indians?
Yes. Literally, she posted a picture in our little parent thing, and she was like, look at these cute Indians. And I was like, what? None of those kids were Native American. 0 of them. And so,
I mean, I don't know if Jeremy can attest to this at all living in Oklahoma, but that
I'm
is
sure I can.
also very frequent in Oklahoma. And we have like the largest concentration of indigenous tribes in our state. We were formerly Indian territory.
Yeah, well, and so, people
You were
a
the
lot
end of the Trail of Tears, right?
Right.
Yeah, this is where the buck stopped right here, and if you've ever been to Oklahoma, there's a reason that they gave this away to the.
You have a lot of interesting sounding town names because
we've got
the
we've got
indigenous
some
heritage there.
We've got some really great indigenous town names, but I remember we would celebrate Land Run Day in elementary school. Right.
Boomer Sooner, right?
Yeah. So for folks who are unfamiliar, the Land Run was where the federal government had taken, countless tribes, shoved them all in Oklahoma, and just said, this is indigenous land. Like, we will manifest destiny everywhere else, but you guys can have this shithole. And so I love it. I am the pastor from Oklahoma, but it's
so you can say that. None of the rest
rough.
of us can. Yeah.
No, but it's a shithole. So, like we don't have mountains or an ocean or anything like that. No, Oklahoma's beautiful.
Excuse me. We have Mount Scott.
We do have Mount Scott,
which is a glorified hill.
Which is like that tall.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So, but I remember like we would dress up like Indians and Land Run people, and everybody would have their stick horse and be running around, and I mean, like those things were our primary university, the University of Oklahoma, is the mascot is literally people who cheated in the Land Run to get land first.
Yes.
And so, and this was all like, hey, Native American folks, we know we told you we were going to shove you all right here and you're going to be fine. And this is going to be, what they considered Indian territory. We were just kidding. And now we're opening the borders and letting people just race to free land. That is Oklahoma.
Well, the Trail of Tears goes by here too. Like there's markers everywhere, like goes right through downtown. So they walked through right here. And my daughter's school, their mascot are the Cherokees, because there are a lot of Cherokee people here. And I don't know how I feel about that. And they have like Native American.
At least it's not some weird slur. Like
right. I'm like, at least it's an actual tribe.
Yeah.
But I just to finish my story, I did email the principal. This like very long like academic, and was like, here's why this is wrong and why we shouldn't do this, and indigenous people were whole human beings that had individual tribes and different things. They shouldn't be coming home Indian. I shouldn't have to argue with my daughter about what actual history is. And I never heard back from the principal, but they didn't do it this year, at least in my daughter's first grade class. I don't know about kindergarten. So I was like, well, they dressed as turkeys this year instead. So maybe there's like, hey, that mom, don't do that wherever her daughter is.
I will say that, as much as my mom tried to assimilate us, right, she was hell to deal with in the education system in Oklahoma, because we, like Jeremy said, we have land run reenactments. Of course, me in like first grade desperately wanted to dress up and participate because I had no idea that it was awful.
Yeah.
My mom absolutely did not allow me to dress up. They actually contacted my mom when she would not sign the permission slip. And they were like, why isn't Candice participating? She said, well, here's the history. And they're like, well, she could dress up in her little costume and participate. And my mom said, absolutely not. And then on that day, she'll be absent from school. So It was like things like that where like, first of all, you don't call Indian regalia a costume. We're not dressing up. This is who we are.
Right.
So that was super rude. Then I had a teacher in like sixth grade, my choir teacher, told us to sit Indian style on the carpet. And my mom found out and chewed her out. So little things like that happened throughout my education, and my mom being the very resilient, strong Indigenous person she is, was like, hell no. I'm going to set you straight. So
How do you feel about, and this may be one of those dumb white guy questions, but how do you feel about sort of the mascot issue here in California? All mascots with references to Indigenous people have been outlawed, and schools have like 5 years to change or something. And you know, we've had a couple of schools say, well, our Indigenous tribe loves it and they feel honored by it and we want to keep it. And that's kind of gone on here. And right now there's a battle there's a little town south of Fresno where I live called Squaw Valley. And so they're, you know, the state is telling them they have to change the name of their town. And they're like, no, it was an honor. And, you know, so here's our Indigenous person to come tell you it's an honor. I mean, how do you feel? How does your community feel about all those things going on in our culture today?
That's a great question. So I think, well, first of all, squaw that's a racial slur for an Indigenous woman. So like, I don't know what Indigenous person is like, yes, absolutely. We are so proud of this racial slur that you're using. Like, I have questions. But it's important to remember that Indigenous people are not a monolith. So we are all sovereign nations, and that means that we all govern ourselves. We have our own traditions and culture surrounding that. So there is probably truth. I haven't looked into it, but there is probably truth about certain tribes or Indigenous groups that are like, no, we absolutely love this. This is an honor to our heritage, to our people. And if that's the case, then 100% I support that tribe's decision to keep whatever name they want to keep. Now, things like the Braves, for example, you might think that that is, you know, honorable.
April.
But I mean, typically that's used to like mock Indigenous Braves. And so I don't have any sort of strong feeling about mascot names because, you know, I'm 34 years old and they've always been the same. So to me, it doesn't change anything. But when you learn the history of things like Squaw or Redskins or the Braves, or I can't think of any others right now, but those types of things, you're like, oh, that feels really icky. I don't like that. So if the surrounding Indigenous community is absolutely against that, then I think that non-Indigenous people should support that because first of all, they've been here longer than you. And secondly, they probably have more historical reference as to why that's hurtful. You know, Redskins, for example, the Redskins, that is a racial slur.
How did that hang around this long? I have no idea.
It has always been a racial slur. It was never a term of endearment. So it's not even like you could probably argue that the Braves is like an honorable term, right? You can't argue that with Redskins. You can't.
No, that's, I mean, I had an Indigenous friend that was like, if you use that word directed at me, it would be like using, you know, a very familiar racial slur to
it's the N-word.
It's the N-word.
It would be like a baseball team named the, you know, Kansas City N-words, you know. I mean,
that's exactly right.
That would be horrible. So it's
and in the same way it is or was. I mean, you know, they've just recently changed, but it was terrible. You know, and I think there's conversation for, you know, you think about teams like named after specific tribes who were like localized to that area. That can, and I think you raise a good point that it's, you know, it's not a monolith, so it could be a good conversation. You know, I think about like the Chicago Blackhawks, you know.
And Christopher in the comments mentioned the Florida State.
Yeah, and they're one of the tribes that says we like this, and But I've always wondered, and I had a friend who described this to me. It would. Some of it, when we're using the symbolism and the feathers and some of the things, it would be like a team called the San Francisco Christians, and they have the dancing pastor, and he comes out with a cross and is dancing all goofy. It's mocking somebody's religion, right? It's mocking and appropriating religious symbols.
My college, I went to a Christian liberal arts college, and we were the Evangels. So I don't know what we didn't really have a mascot though. So there wasn't like a dancing Bible that like came out at one time. So
there's like a sword or something now, right?
Is there a sword?
I have to look.
I went to a Christian liberal arts college, and our mascot were the Crusaders.
Yeah, I was going to say, at least
I don't know if that's I don't know if we should be proud of that.
I don't think we should. No,
1,000%.
Christians should never hold crusades ever again. Billy Graham crusades. I'm like, get rid of that word. That's
absolutely. Absolutely.
That's a smirch on our history.
But
I do like the dancing Bible idea, though. I would kind of go for that. That would be a good mascot.
That was the really great shirt that started going around as the pressure built against the the Commanders. That was the pressure that was building up, is like it was like people were wearing shirts that were like Washington crackers or things like that, with like,
that'd be something I would do.
But it makes perfect sense. Oh, you don't like this? You don't like this really, like, overly hyperbolized image of a Caucasian person being made fun of for a school team or a professional team or whatever. But I think about here in Oklahoma, we have a school that uses the image of Tecumseh, which is obviously was a Native American who was extremely intelligent, brilliant, literally wrote languages, and the school that uses his image as their mascot is Tecumseh High School, but their mascot name is the Savages. They are the Tecumseh Savages.
That's awful.
So, I think I'm just like, to go back to your question, Paul, realistically, I think most of us are pretty desensitized to it. It's not like people generally listen to Indigenous voices anyway. So I think in terms of what at least the Indigenous people that I know think about mascots is like, whatever, it is offensive and it's hurtful and there's painful history, just like, the Tecumseh Savages or whatever. And then to go back to FSU, even though they work with the Seminole tribe, there's still offensive imagery that their fans typically use. And I can't say what the Seminole tribe in Florida thinks about that, but I know that Indigenous people are like, not a fan. But what can we do? People have voiced their opinions on it, and nothing tends to change. It's only been recently that, like you were saying, in California, and then with the Redskins name change. And
let's not forget the Indians, the Cleveland Indians just changed this last year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think historically we've just been ignored, and so we've all just become pretty desensitized to it. Hey, that's my mom.
Hi, Mom.
Hi, Mom. Hi, Mom.
Kathy Parker, who is the comment on the screen, is your mom.
Yes.
Oh,
there's your college mascot.
That is my college mascot.
Yeah. So
I mean, that looks pretty cool for an evangel.
Well, and I like your take on it, but
exactly what I was talking about, Jeremy.
I think I love your take, and I love each tribe is sovereign, but at the same time, if there was some group of African American people in Alabama who said, we don't really mind being called the N-words, and our local high school honors us. I mean, I think every other African American in the country would say, no, that's not okay. It's not okay whether you think it is or not. It's not okay.
Yes. I think, the interesting dynamic with Indigenous people is that we are sovereign, so we have that separatism between our groups, but also because of the hardships that we've endured over the past 400, 500 years, and because of assimilation, we've had to come together to be one voice. And so we try to honor, like the Seminoles, for example, we try to honor the fact that like they like that. They think it's an honor to them. But when it comes to offensive imagery, offensive language levied against us, then of course we're all like, I don't really care if you think that's good. We're going to say no. Like, no, thank you. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I'm also wondering if there's any like Candace Owens equivalents where white people just like find the one person that's
Yes.
like,
The
you'll
token.
agree with me
Always.
and we'll put you on a pedestal.
Always there is.
Yes, that's
back
the Indigenous
to-
person down here saying Squaw Valley is okay.
No, not okay. I think back to oh gosh, I cannot remember the exact name of the guy. Do you remember that incident that happened at the Capitol where there was this young white man who approached a group of Indigenous protesters?
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
terrible, stoic, and was like super rude. I remember that story blowing up in Oklahoma because, of course, we have a huge Indigenous population here, right? And there would always be that one Indigenous person who was like defending that kid when, like, clearly that kid was intentionally being disrespectful. So, of course, I don't personally know of like one specific Indigenous voice that's like the Candace Owens of Indigenous people, but they are out there for sure.
Yeah.
There's always you know, the radical right will always get a hold of a token, right? Like somebody, the Candace Owens or whatever.
And you know what? I was okay with being the token Indian person in a group for a really long time. You can, to be perfectly honest, it can get you pretty far.
Yeah.
I'm not now, so don't do it.
Well, I mean, that is
Yeah.
the sad thing though. Like there's money in it. There's a bunch of white people on that side that will throw money at anyone that can validate their bigotry.
Yes, absolutely. Especially when it came to ministry, I think because the church has so much, and we can get into that later because I know you probably have other things you want to talk about, but the church has so much to answer for as it relates to Indigenous people. So they really like to get an Indigenous person up on stage to say, oh, it's okay. We can move on. We're healed, all these things. And that was who I was for a period of time as I worked in ministry. And I'm sure my mom could probably say the same when she worked in ministry too. She was the one that was like, well, she's Indigenous, so it's fine, you know?
Yeah.
Wow. So the churches love to do that. We repent and or we apologize, but repentance actually means to change and live differently. And that's why I think these conversations are so important, because we have to sit with this pain so that next time we won't do the same thing again. So when Republicans start demonizing trans kids, we say, no, we've been down this path before and we failed so many times. Let's not fail this time. So I appreciate you bringing this conversation to the table.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely.
Is there, I guess it almost sounds to me like assimilation is maybe more prevalent in the Indigenous populations than some of the other BIPOC populations. Would you say that's true? And is that it seems like that would be a big problem in trying to preserve your heritage going forward.
I think that it's pretty equal across different BIPOC groups, because when you think about the Black community in the United States, around that same time was when the transatlantic slave trade was happening. And so they also were not able to form their own identity in America. It was forced upon them. As far as Christianity is concerned, there
Right.
are years and years of generational trauma using specific Christian language to assimilate them into what they wanted. The same can be true for Asian populations, particularly in the 1900s, you know? So, like, I think we all have similar experiences, though they're not the same, with assimilation. I kind of lost track of where the question was going. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I feel like it was a pretty ignorant. It was a question from ignorance on my part, and I appreciate your answer so much because, yes, not only did we force Christianity on groups, and when I say we, white European folks, but then a cultural assimilation as well as a part of that, and really that is a reckoning that we need to come to terms with at some point and have a true repentance.
Well, and I think that particularly for Indigenous people, maybe it's just that it was so blatant because we had the whole kill the Indian, save the man, residential schools. We were one of the last groups to earn voting rights in the United States. We could not practice our religion until the late 60s. So it probably feels a lot more in your face than maybe some other groups because we were the last people to receive rights in this country and recognized as citizens, even though we were here first. Like it's crazy when you think about that. So I think that's probably, I don't think it's ignorant at all. It just probably feels a lot more in your face because it's so much more recent than people realize.
I didn't realize that until you just said it.
Yeah.
So
I can't remember the specific year. I think when we got the right to vote, but 1968-ish was when the American Indian Religion Act was passed, and I may have gotten that name wrong.
I mean, we're discussing though a country that, we look at all of these things that are so what we would consider horrible, terrible in other places in the world, but we have been guilty of a lot of that here. I mean, the United States, the United States had concentration camps, internment camps.
Yes.
I mean,
I think we're more often bad at this than we are good at it.
Yeah.
Yes, we took Japanese-looking people and put them into concentration camps.
Yeah, almost 200,000 Japanese folks, and really there were actually people who were. This is very American as well. There were 200,000 Asian people inside of concentration camps, most of them Japanese, but some of them of other heritage because the white man just couldn't tell them apart.
They still can't.
Yeah, and still can't.
Yes, we would actually have soldiers fighting for the United States overseas that would have to come home and visit their parents in concentration camps. I mean, I don't think again, it's the education thing. I don't think we feel the pain of that enough. What we did was sin. It was a horror. Yes. It was a terror upon a group of people that we still have yet to truly reckon with and say that was a really bad moment. And so again, when we start putting kids in cages at the border, there should be something in us that rises up and says, we failed at this before. Let's not do this again.
And then the audacity for if someone calls it out to say, hey, this is wrong. They're like, you're just woke. You're persecuting me.
Well,
anyway, is the opposite of woke asleep, by the way?
I don't know, because they're like, wake up, but don't be woke.
I almost wanted to say it was a sheep, but that's also the other thing they call you. So I don't know.
You're a sheep. You're asleep. But
you're also pastor woke. In a church literally means a shepherd, by the way.
Yeah. Well, and how many times did Jesus literally refer to us as sheep, his followers, right?
Oh my gosh. I remember when we did I went to a lot of Black Lives Matter protests and they called us sheep. the counter protesters would scream at us, sheep, sheep, sheep. And there's a local minister who made a sign that was like, Jesus is my shepherd. I'm a happy little sheep. He's like a cute, like, he's like in his 70s. He's such a sweet old man. It's like, I love that.
Yeah. But, you know, I mean, here again, you know, we talk about concentration camps in the United States. That was in the 40s, going back to World War II.
Wasn't long ago.
It wasn't that long ago. Even better yet, you know, there's images that have surfaced over the past couple of weeks when they integrated Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. There are images of Jerry Jones standing there and protesting integration in Little Rock, Arkansas. Jerry Jones, you can watch him on ESPN later. Yeah, and then so there are
Cowboys Jerry Jones.
Yeah, the Cowboys Jerry Jones, and so you know who also I don't want to necessarily give my source on this, but you know when there was protests happening in the NFL. There was a photo that came out of Jerry kneeling with his players. Apparently that was not during the anthem and taken kind of like at a different, like, off time.
They did it before the game.
Yeah. And so, that feels very publicity stunt to me, but I only bring that up because, you know, we're talking about integration of our public schools that has happened in the lifetime of somebody that we talk about on a regular basis. You know, I mean, like it's my mom got swats in elementary school for drinking from the quote unquote colored water fountain. My mom.
And the reality is, especially when you see Indigenous creators on like TikTok talking about residential schools and Indian boarding schools, there are still Indian boarding schools. There are 2 that are active in the state of Oklahoma. They look different now, but you cannot escape the history of that boarding school. And people think that it happened eons ago. My grandmother was in it. She was removed from her family home at 6 years old. She was removed at 6 years old. She was the only one that was there in her age group. So she was forced to live alone for 2 months before another 6-year-old came to Fort Sill Indian School. That's how old my daughter is. I cannot imagine having her removed from my home for no discernible reason, live away from me. This was before cell phones, right? So it's not like I would be able to contact her, and I have no idea how she's being treated. Like when I think about it, it makes me so emotional and upset. And this is someone who is still alive. She is my grandmother. She is very active. She drives. This wasn't 100 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. And I love the history of Little Rock Central High School and that story. And we, you know, soldiers had to march these kids into the school, these African-American kids. But the tragedy, the real tragedy of that whole story is it wasn't many years later that Little Rock Central was almost a completely black high school. All of the white people moved away because of the desegregation of that school. And so we're still finding ways to do this. We have a white flight town out, you know, a little suburb called Clovis that says we're better at everything because it's the white flight city of Fresno.
That's
and
the
so
history
we're still doing this.
Of so many private Christian schools and, you know, elementary, middle school, like a lot of those started as a result of integration.
1,000%. And that is also to this day why, you know, a lot of conservative states are demanding like vouchers and things like that. It is a white flight tactic, point blank, period. And, you know, the Oklahoma City area is absolutely notoriously bad. You know, the white flight just continues further and further to the outskirts of Oklahoma City. And, the redlining and gentrification. So, you know, basically the attitude of white people is if the government won't do it for me, then I'll just do it for myself.
Yeah. And I'll find a way to get a tax break for it.
And
then eventually they'll find a way to get the government to do it for them. If they're especially if they're in a red state. And this is just a friendly reminder that Bob Jones University banned interracial dating until 2001.
I didn't realize it was
Jesus
until 2001. Oh my
I
God.
didn't
God,
realize it
that's
was that late either.
2001. 2001.
But they
that is
used-
in this
they-
millennium.
They used to hand out that Bob Jones had written a document about why it was sinful for interracial dating was sinful. And I think it was until like 1988, they made every student read that document as to why. And so
They lost their tax exemption for a long time. I think 2001 was when they got it back because they're like, fine, you can interracially date. That was
well, and as we
awful.
know, that forcing of the integration of Christian schools is where the abortion issue became a political issue, because they're like, all right, we can't push racism as our issue. We'll push abortion as our issue. So this is again a terrible blight on the church.
The conversation about interracial relationships has been popping off on Twitter lately for some reason. I follow a few different people who have been calling out, the Theo bros that are talking about it. And I'm like, people still, my echo chamber, I think, is small, because it shocks me that people still are like, I saw something on Twitter where a guy was talking about how it's not oh gosh, what was it? It was a relative sin. It's not an outright sin. And I was like, what? There's a
What is
difference.
that?
What does
Well,
that mean?
yeah, listen, they will tear anything to make sure that they are squeaky clean, and only it's just and not say the quiet part as out loud.
Well,
it's
Saying it pretty out loud.
I mean, it's out loud, but
it's out loud.
Like
And
a
let's
little
not forget, we just had a former president of the United States and a apparently current candidate for president of the United States sitting down with a Nazi and having dinner in Thanksgiving week.
And
Ben
then when-
Shapiro actually
literal-
called him out.
A literal Nazi.
I just want to clarify. I looked it up real quick. It was not 2001. It was 2000. So I was 1 year off.
Wow.
I mean, still in this millennium though.
Oh,
Still
well, that makes it
millennial.
all the better then.
They were 1 year, more
Like
progressive.
we had gone through Y2K and y'all are still doing this shit. Okay. But it's like, I mean, we're in fucking 2022. Okay. And now we have Theo bros on Twitter singing praises to Elon Musk and talking about how questionable it is to be in a multi-ethnic marriage. Like that is absolutely asinine to me. I can't, and I know crazy is out there. Like I get crazy is out there, but it is way more prevalent. It feels like than I agree with Candice. Like that still shocks me to see stuff like that. Like in this day, but
Like I'd be in serious trouble.
Yeah.
And we have to realize how subtle it is, that things like states' rights is a race-based term. States' rights was all about allowing states to have slavery and Jim Crow laws. These are dog whistles, traditional family. These are terms that are racist terms, but we've cleansed them somehow to be godly. And it's just, we have to be aware that we can be really cruel people to one another.
And I love Lincoln, but you have to remember at the end of the day, while he was anti-slave, it was still true that wasn't his main agenda in fighting against the South to keep them connected to the Union. He just knew that if they lost all the farmland that the South provided, that the factories of the North would shut down and it would cripple the country economically. So, I mean, let's call it what it is. It was an economic war. It wasn't, I mean, yes, he was anti-slave and he said some good things there. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think he would have compromised that if he could have.
Well, there's a lot of indication that he was still a racist.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. It's like, let's say what it is. Like, it was still about money and power for white people.
But Republicans, I'll just say it, they like to dress it up as he was this abolitionist, and that's the Republican Party.
Right.
They're all like, Christian, it was evangelicals that ended slavery. I'm like, bitch, it was evangelicals that supported it.
Right.
Yeah.
The Southern Baptist. Don't ever forget
we have
why
the
there's
SBC.
a Southern Baptist church.
That's exactly right. Who just recently, in the last 5 years, has put out a memorandum to not allow the Confederate flag in their churches.
What a blessing.
Oh, well done.
Wow.
Well done.
Yeah. So that's within the last 5 years. So we're doing well.
Kind of bring it back to like talking about Indigenous issues. Now, so I went to the what was it called? The Secretary of the Interior came to the Riverside Indian School in Anadarko to hear testimony of Indian school survivors, and the SBC issued a statement apologizing to Indigenous people, but that was just this year for their part.
Wow.
Assimilating Indigenous people, and they sent the token Indian to deliver the message. That was and maybe that's an unfair thing to think, but I recorded it and was like, of course you did this. Thanks.
And to take us back to the topic of the show, Candice, it sounds like, so we can celebrate a holiday around Thanksgiving time, but maybe use it as an opportunity to educate ourselves rather than to live in a blind past.
Well, I had this conversation actually recently on my Facebook account, which is a pit of despair in case anyone's still on Facebook. But there was this individual, I kind of shared my thoughts about how this holiday kind of becomes more complicated to me. The older I get, the more that I learn. It's interesting to me. And I don't ever want to tell someone else how they feel their convictions or how they should celebrate something that is near and dear to their heart. If you want to celebrate Thanksgiving, absolutely do so. It's important to know the history of why you're celebrating it. And I think that Christians would say the same thing, especially when we're talking about things like Halloween. They want you to make sure that you know the history of that holiday. You know what I'm saying? Like, it goes both ways. And so I never want someone to feel like I'm saying, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. Do whatever you feel convicted to do or not do. But it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay to educate yourself on the history. And it's always a good time to celebrate family, and it's always a good time to share a meal together. So that's kind of how I feel about Thanksgiving as a whole.
That makes sense.
Appreciate that
Candice,
perspective.
tell everybody where they can find you. Again, just a reminder.
Sure. So I am on TikTok. My TikTok handle is Candice. Wait, no, I forget my own TikTok. It's Candice Cakes _. That's it.
Candice with an I.
Candice. Yeah.
And then you can find me pretty much on every social media platform. But also, I have a Redbubble shop.
Ooh, I love Redbubble.
Design, and I have some Indigenous designs on there. I share it with my husband. My husband's name is John, so that's where the JK design comes
So
from.
people can go to Redbubble and just search JK design.
Yes.
No spaces.
And it's also, if you go to my TikTok, there's a link tree, and there's a link to it there.
Awesome.
And this CherokeeDelegate.com, you wanted to point that out as well.
Yes. We didn't really talk about it much, but we don't have to at all. But right now there is a push to get Congress to vote for a Cherokee delegate to be appointed to office. when the Trail of Tears happened in 1865, part of the treaty that the Cherokee Nation signed with the United States was that they would provide a delegate for the Cherokee Nation. And 200 years later, they still have not honored their treaty. So the Cherokee Nation is organizing right now to get Congress to vote to put their delegate that they've appointed in place. This would be the first time that an Indigenous person held an office like that spoke for Indian country specifically, and could be the voice to major issues like water rights and mineral rights and the Indian Child Welfare Act and tribal sovereignty and all of those things. It's really cool that we've seen a lot more Indigenous women elected to office in the past couple of years, but this would be a truly historical moment for Indigenous people. So CherokeeDelegate.com will send you to a petition to sign, and it will also automatically draft up a letter to your representatives to vote for the issue as well.
That's awesome. And we will put the link to your Redbubble and Cherokee Delegate in the show notes. So if you're listening, you can go there to click on that.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely crazy, you know, that even although a non-voting delegate, Puerto Rico has a delegate in Congress, and our indigenous tribes that are sovereign and should have a voice at the table is, you know, we work hand in hand with the tribes, or should be trying to work hand in hand with the tribes. They should have representation on that level as well. So anyway, yeah, you guys go to the website and absolutely send those letters.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Candice.
Thank you guys so much. This is so fun. And I'm glad I got to meet all of you. I've known Jeremy for a while, but Paul and April, I've followed you guys for a while. And so it's really cool to sit down and have a conversation with you.
Yes, I loved it. I've been seeing your name and face in TikTok world, so it's nice to sit down and have a conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Well,
and next week, Naked Pastor David Hayward is going to be joining us. We forgot to mention that at the beginning. Yeah, so he's going to be our guest next Wednesday, same time, 9 p.m. Eastern, live or in podcast form. So
awesome.
Next week. Awesome.
All right. Well, we appreciate Candice and just her coming and giving us some really great perspective and some thoughts for tonight. And I'm super grateful that she spent this time. I'm also grateful that she's one of my Oklahomies. So anyway, all right. For Pastor Paul and April, I'm Jeremy. We love y'all. Have a wonderful night. We'll see you next week.